Thank you for joining us for a Finding God in Video Games Ministry Spotlight. And today I have two very special guests from Poetically Christian. I have Derrick and his wife Brandy with us. Thank you for joining.
Hey, GG's. Good to see you guys.
Good to see you too as well. We've been looking forward to this for quite some time. Been a big fan of your writing and your videos and getting to see all the inspirational stuff that you put up on a regular basis, which is not easy. I'm very aware of that. So I wanted to just get to know a little bit more about y'all and your ministry. So Derrick, we'll start with you. How did you get into the gaming aspect of things? Did you just start playing it growing up, or how did you get there?
Oh man, I grew up as a Sega kid. Well, actually, my dad had an
Nothing wrong with
Atari.
that.
I grew up playing that, but I was gifted a Sega Master System. I know this is going totally retro, but I was gifted that, and I became kind of a Sega kid throughout the Genesis, and then I actually went into Nintendo, Super Nintendo, and all those things as well. So I've been a gamer for my entire life, and when I got married to my wife, we hit it right off because she grew up as a Sega kid as well. So we had that in common as one of the many things. Of course, she's my partner in Christ as well. And so we've just had that going on our whole life. But I've been a gamer my entire life.
Now I'm gonna ask you a question. How faithful did you remain to Sega through the years? Because I will tell you, I started off as a Nintendo person, moved to Sega, and then I was that person then when PlayStation came out, I'm like, no, Sega Saturn. That's going to be it. That's going to be the way to go. And then I doubled down that next generation. I'm like, no, y'all sleeping on the Dreamcast. The Dreamcast is going to be here for generations. Look at this little VMU that goes in here. Look at the amazing technology in it. I was wrong every single time. Sega only ever bought parts, but
Yeah,
I
I
stayed
was
faithful to the end.
I was the same. It was the exact same. Unfortunately, though, I was a trader during the Saturn. I all my friends had PlayStations, and I was a trader, and I did not get the Saturn, but I readopted with the Dreamcast.
Is there a game that brought you into the PlayStation family? Because I'll tell you, for me, like I was hardcore. It's Sega, Sega, Sega all the time, even though the selection of games was not great. But then I played the original Metal Gear Solid in a. It was. I remember it distinctly. I was in a Target. It was on the little interactive demo thing, that we you used to be able to, like, when your parents were shopping, you'd be like, oh, I can do this for 3 hours, and
Oh
then
yeah.
Metal Gear Solid. And after that, I'm like, I'm converted. I will. Where's the
Oh yeah.
Kool-Aid for Sony? I'm drinking all the Kool-Aid. I'm in. Was there a
Here's
moment
another.
that it did it for you? Was there a game that pulled you to the dark side?
Oh yeah, definitely. I grew up a fighting game guy, and so the minute I saw Tekken, I knew that Virtua Fighter's days were numbered. And, and so, but you remember, I don't know if like you grew up around like Sears or Toys R Us, different things. They used
Oh,
to have those kiosks where you would go and while your parents were doing something, you'd be playing that. Oh, that's where I first played Tekken. I was hooked.
it'd have those little jam packs that would have
Oh yeah,
20
yeah,
different games on there.
yeah,
And after that, you're like, I know what I want for Christmas now. It's
yeah,
exactly what it
yeah,
is.
definitely, definitely.
Yeah.
And so, Brandy, you kind of came up very similarly in terms of your gamesmanship
Yeah.
over the years.
I started, I really remember really well the Nintendo. My parents, I had one. And I remember the Christmas that I got my Sega, and my grandma, God love her, she was an amazing woman. And so she got me and my cousins a Sega at the same time for Christmas. So I went from Nintendo to Sega. And then when Derrick and I got married, I was still a Sega kid. so, so I still had that and we still played it. And then he introduced me to PlayStation. And then we became Xbox
Yeah,
people.
now we're Xbox. We've really run the gamut.
So there is a system that we don't like at some point.
Right.
It's funny how the loyalty shifts over the years based on, like, the specific games that you get into. Like, for a while, it was, for me, it was, I will follow this specific company. And I'm like, oh, Halo, hold on now.
Yeah.
Sorry, I may not be back. I'm gonna go with this. That was the one that converted me then. My friends came in like, you're gonna have to play this game. I'm like, I looked at it, I'm like, it looks like a generic Doom knockoff. I'm not sure this is that great. And then I saw it one time, I'm like, we're all getting Xboxes, right? It's over
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
We're all doing LAN parties after that.
Oh man, that's really bringing back the retro vibes.
It's
Uh,
funny. I have a little fun story to tell. So the reason why I knew Xbox was here to stay when we were married early on and his friends and him were playing Xbox, and his friends was like at college, like away from there, so he'd come home on the weekends. And so when they were playing Halo, and they like accidentally shot one of the guys, and the guy goes, "Do I owe you money?" And it was like on their own team, and I was roaring laughing, and they were roaring laughing because it was one of the first games where they ever, like, your same team responded if you did something incorrectly like that. And I was like, all right, we're gonna be on Xbox forever now. I know it at this point, just because of how much we all laughed. When I was in the kitchen, I could hear them just roaring laughing.
Those were the best times, the best time.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, a lot of times for me, that was also like times where unintentionally, like ministry aspects could come into play. Like a lot of times, at the end of those kind of things, I didn't go in with an agenda or something like that, but then that's where a lot of people would start sharing real things in their life. Like they're sitting there, they're playing after a few hours of multiplayer, they start talking, and they start talking
Oh
about
yeah.
real things. And it gives an opportunity for us to be an in the spot minister that we didn't intend to. I just came there, I hate to say it, I just came there to kill you. But now that we're having this moment, I'm like, maybe there's a greater purpose to me coming to this LAN party than simply trying to dominate in a team deathmatch. So when did you realize that like your passion for things gaming could translate into something of a ministerial fashion where you could use this to reach people?
Oh man, I'm we take on, as Christians, we take on a Christian worldview. But I always, even growing up, I was brought up in the church, and so I'm a person that sees God in everything. Someone might see Spider-Man, and they might hear, with great power comes great responsibility. I think of Luke 12:48, to whomsoever much is given, of him shall much be required. I'm like, that's Spider-Man.
The
Uh,
message
you know,
version of the Bible probably says with great power comes great.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just, that's the way it is. I'm a person that I saw God in everything, and then I wanted my friends to see it, because maybe necessarily they weren't Christian, but they like this. And I thought, well, if I can get in where they are, I like to call it putting ourselves in the boat philosophy. In Luke, the 5th chapter, when Christ went up to gather the disciples, he didn't go up and say, repent, or you guys need to read your Bible every day and be in the temple worshiping, or otherwise things aren't going to work out for you. No, what he did is he went up and said, hey, you guys caught anything last night? No? You might want to try the right side of the boat. Try this. You might have a little bit better luck. He put himself in the boat, spoke on terms that they understood, and he won them over to becoming fishers of men. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do when I go on Twitch or put up a YouTube video. I'm hoping I can take something that people like, respect, understand, and then bring the gospel into it and say, well, hey, if that guy likes what I like, and he's interested in this God thing, maybe there's something to that. I've always wondered about God, and that might be the way of getting in.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important and powerful when we lead through our own humanity to be able to speak to God's reality in that way.
Right.
When you lead, like you said, in the other direction, it feels very compliance based. You're like, well, you need to do this in order to access God, instead
Right.
of, hey, we're all hungry for fish here. And I was just thinking,
Right.
if you actually caught some, that would be great. And if you did it this way, we'd all be
Yeah.
some fish sandwiches tonight. And then after
Right.
that, I'm going to talk to you about some things. And I think that would be,
Yeah.
and when you think of like the most authentic way we can reach people for the Lord, it's often through our connected hobbies and passions and those things.
Right.
And I know that you have a great support partner with your ministry as well. So how did you find your way into this and make this a collaborative?
So I didn't grow up with religion, but I had an interest in religion. And so I would try to read the Bible whenever I could, or go to church with my friends growing up, when they were going to church. And so when Derrick and I met on the first day of college, we talked, and he had laughed at something that I said. Again, mutual interests, mutual hobbies, that sort of thing. And so we started talking, and then as our conversation developed, I would have questions, or I would say something, and then he would have an answer, and then I was like, oh, okay. So then his whole family, when I got introduced to them, that kind of happened. So it just kind of snowballed into that. So then I was like, so how do I know your religion is the right religion? And so then they had all the questions or all the answers to my questions. And they actually pulled out the Bible and were showing me in the Bible. And so that was kind of how we connected spiritually. And then with the interest of video games and things like that, it just kind of grew. And then our relationship. So everything that he does, I'm in 100%. I'm his biggest fan. I'm his biggest supporter. So if he says he wants to do it, we're going to do it.
It took a little bit of coaching to get her to come along the YouTube game. She likes
great.
her gaming, but it took a little coaxing to get her to go on air.
I said I was intimidated because sometimes I ramble. And so that makes me nervous that I might not come, my points might not be as clear as I would like them to be.
And once we got her going, then it's like, we could do House Flipper. I could show them this stuff. So she's got ideas for her own.
Now, you could probably just play Power Wash Simulator for hours and you can get through whole books of the Bible with that. If you really chose to. It can be very therapeutic. Just sit there and just slowly clean a house all day long. I'm not my own house, but I'll clean virtual houses all day. So
absolutely.
So that kind of brings us to the whole blind preacher plays aspect of things, which is not the only part of your ministry, but it's obviously a component that speaks directly to gaming. So what made you decide that's something that you saw value in? I think I can do something that's not really happening in this space, or maybe not happening at a level. I mean, there's certainly Christian Twitch streamers. There's lots of those out there, but what you're doing is a little more specific around it's definitely ministry first, and you happen to be playing games while you do it.
Right. Well, I grew up, actually, I was born legally blind with a disease called Stargardt's, Stargardts. That's what they thought I had for a lot of my life. And then as I progressed, they found out that it was a mutation or a mixture with something called RP, or retinitis pigmentosa. So basically, a long story short, it takes away the central part of your vision somewhat, makes it dark, fuzzy, things like that. So you end up using the peripheral parts of your vision that the Lord has still afforded me to do things. So I got to thinking about, in our life, no matter who you are, we all have a cross to bear. For some, it might be emotional. For some, it might be mental, physical, financial. We all have the things that we go through in life. I thought I could take a unique experience that I went through and maybe be able to relate to somebody that's out there that thinks that they don't have a purpose, or that their purpose has been diminished, or they feel like, oh, maybe I'm damaged goods, or what good could I be to the Lord? And I thought, if I can get my story across and make them see that, hey, someone like me can do this, you can do it as well. My whole moniker for the series is, it's a series where a legally blind preacher, tries to conquer games while we glorify God's name. And no matter what personal cross you face, you can overcome it with perseverance and God's grace. And that's what I want to drive the whole point across to folks, is to let them know you are needed by the Lord. All of us are. Paul went to the Lord 3 times in a prayer, and many folks believe he had poor eyesight, which I believe Galatians 4:15 says. But whatever his result was, he asked that it could be removed from him 3 times. This was something that bothered him. He called it the messenger of Satan to buffet him. It was something that really, really troubled him. And the Lord and Christ responded by saying, my grace is sufficient for you. My strength is made perfect in weakness. So even in the weakest moments of your life, in the moments where you think you can't accomplish things, think again, because through the Lord, you can do great things.
It's interesting, especially with Paul, when you think about it, like, this is a person in the Bible that literally people would just he'd touch cloth and it would create healing in different zip codes. Like, these things, like, prayers are being answered all over the place, but his own prayer was one that went unanswered, at least not in the manner that he wanted, because God was still going to use that. And I think that it's a very important message for some of us when we think about ministering grace that we're currently receiving, even though we're we don't have all the answers that we'd like right now. We're still in our own state of struggle. I mean, you guys have some very real challenges you're going through right now, and yet you are still pursuing the ministry part of this, seeing the greater purpose for it. There's a part in the Old Testament that a lot of people, I don't know, always look at when you think of this. But what I love about your ministry is you take that perception of maybe an inability due to a disability, and you turn that on its ear and say, no, this is going to be my ministry. I'm going to minister through this. It's actually going to be my differentiator in this space. And I think of back in the Old Testament, there was an assassin named Ehud. You're probably familiar with the story. And when you see him in the Bible, he's described as a left-handed individual, but the actual Hebrew says that he had a diminished right hand. He wasn't left-handed. He had a disability. His disability was his right hand didn't work properly. And it was because of that perceived disability that he gained access to an evil king, because he wasn't perceived as a threat. He was able to sneak in a weapon because they were like, not the disabled guy. He has no chance. We don't even need to guard him. And he turned out to be the assassin that the Lord had chose all along. He was chosen not in spite of it. He was chosen because of it, that he was able to be the most effective minister of what the Lord wanted in that moment. And I think that's just such a powerful thought of what you're doing here as well, that you're not saying, I'm going to serve the Lord in spite of this. You're saying, I'm serving the Lord through this. I'm openly embracing this is my ministry. I'm the blind preacher who plays video games. I think that's just, it's such a great message for those that may be in a similar situation and they're disappointed in it because God didn't remove it the way that Paul asked. And God said, no, I need you to just push through this. Your ministry is going to still be just as strong. You're actually going to heal people that have maybe even your same ailment, but it may not be for you.
Right. And we can all think about someone like that in our life. We've all had somebody that maybe they didn't even realize we were watching their life, but they were a great example to us. Maybe they went through a tough financial time or physical time in their life, and you saw how they handled that with grace, and it motivated you to want to be a better Christian, to up your game, to be and I think that's what any of us can do. God sees beyond who we are to what we can be. And sometimes if we don't get that instant gratification or that instant answer to our prayer, we think, why? Why didn't this work out? This seems like it would be a perfect thing for me. But God sees 10 years down the road that what you are going to do and not where you are right now. That's sometimes the hardest part. The waiting's the hardest part, as they say.
And sometimes we just need to thank God for the unanswered prayers, because He knows what's best for us and how it's going to turn out better in the end.
Absolutely. I think of like Ruth as a great story of that. Like you could
why
didn't he heal her husband, heal her father-in-law, heal her brother-in-law? Why didn't he just let one of them live? Why did they all have to die? Why did it have to be so hard and for all that tragedy to happen? And then you work through the entire timeline of it, like, and then why did she have to go back? And it still was terrible. Like she went straight into digging for food, but it was because she was meant to be in the genealogy of Christ, and that was the only path to get there, was through some really almost you can't even conceive of the tragedies that were going in. And they're like, when we go, I've never lost 4 people in a short period of time quite like that. Like I've had tragedies. I've never had that. That's a rough start to your story.
Right.
And yet she became in the lineage of David himself. And then
absolutely. And even stronger to that, she was a Moabite, which at the time was not one of God's chosen people and was actually looked down upon by a lot of folks. But God used her and brought her in to be one that ushers in our Savior. I thought that was awesome too. Talk about sometimes we feel like an outsider. There was no more of an outsider than Ruth. And she showed that God has, again, a plan for us all.
Everyone else was probably looking at like, what are you doing in this story? You're not even supposed to be here today.
Yeah.
How did you get here?
Right.
This is supposed to be a story of God's faithfulness to Abraham through all of these generations. And yet then here comes Ruth blasting in from a totally idolatrous side and it ends up becoming a focal point of the story. I think it's a great and beautiful reminder for us that, and a lot of people, I like to ask you this question, they may feel like outsiders to faith, even if they believe maybe that there is a higher power. They happen to believe that that higher power is manifested in a deity of some form, but maybe the perception of Christianity and their experience with it has made them feel like they are an outsider for them.
Right. Right.
So what would you say to that person? Maybe they're listening now. That's like, that all sounds well and good. You two sound like, people that I could relate to. Brandy seems like someone I could relate to. But my experiences with people of your faith, I feel like I'm an outsider in that story.
I would say beyond religion, there's a God, and you have that little voice inside of yourself that says there must be something. There's something beyond this life when we pass. There's something and a reason for me to be here. How many folks in this life look around, wonder, what is my purpose? What is my reason for being here? We all have a purpose. And if you take God on into your life, you're going to start to see the changes. A lot of times people get hung up in the religious aspect of it. And maybe they've had someone in their past that's condemned them for something. And I've always said there's a huge difference between exhortation and condemnation. We sometimes need to tell other folks about the gospel and show them the right way and try to help lead them along the way, but we need to do it in a meek, fearful, loving manner, in a way that shows them that we're not doing this to try to judge their life, but we're trying to do this to help them and show them that if they take God on, you will see the difference in your life. You take him on, you start reading his word, following what he wants you to do, he's going to start opening up those paths for you. You're going to find that purpose that you've sought through so many things. I think a lot of times people want to belong to things, they seek all the right things just in the wrong places. And those things are all temporary. They're not going to lead to long lasting fulfillment. Take God on. It's not going to always be an easy road. It's not going to be, well, I got the stamp of Christian and now my life's going to be easy, but you are going to start to see his plan for your life, his purpose, and you're going to see your reason for being. And that, I can't think of a greater fulfillment in life to find contentment. If we find contentment, that's the zenith of your life. You find that moment where I've realized what I am put here to do. That's it.
And in addition to that, if I may, but there are good and bad people everywhere. And there are people that maybe say things that they shouldn't or act in ways that they shouldn't. Just because you're Christian doesn't mean you're perfect. Everybody is at different levels in their journey, and they're in different walks. They're at different stages. They have different lessons that they've learned at different times. So just because you've had a bad experience once doesn't mean that it's always going to be that way. Maybe, and again, you're not perfect. Maybe you caught them at a bad day. Not that that's an excuse. Maybe they didn't handle it like they should have. That's not an excuse, but they were at a different step in their journey. Not everybody's always going to be that way. Whether you're Christian or not, you're going to have somebody on an off day, or you're going to have somebody who doesn't have the same lessons and experiences that they should to approach the topic or approach the person as they should.
Absolutely. We're all living our real lives out here. We are all streaming our individual lives in a glass house as followers of Christ and as ambassadors. It's a huge responsibility for us, and certainly we don't always get it right. And what you chose to do, you chose to really make that public through your ministry and the things that you're doing. So obviously you took all of these experiences, you decided to do something with it from a ministry standpoint, the poetry aspect, the gaming aspect of these things. But starting out these ministries is not easy. They start really, really small, and then they stay really, really small for a very long time.
Yes.
Would love to learn a little bit about how you started and what you would tell someone who's like, this sounds inspirational to me. I'd love to start doing something. Maybe they started and it didn't take off the way they hoped. Like, everyone's gonna love this. I'm doing something new, and then only 3 people like your thing. It can be very tough. So tell us a little bit about how you went from the little that you were given to the Lord and to growing into the much that you have now, and what you would tell people who are trying to find that place.
Take your time, realize that God's plan is not necessarily always our plan. If things do take time, but think about it. Every single time that you have maybe those 3 people that watch, that's 3 souls you spoke to. that's 3 lives you may have changed, and you never know. I know I've experienced in my life a lot of times, like maybe I'll put out a devotional on my Facebook, and you might only have 10 people or 20 people that react to it, but we've come to find that maybe 300 people have seen it. And so you never know who you're talking to. So treat every day, every journey that you take, every video that you put out, every stream you put out, as if you may be approaching somebody for the very first time. And this might be the only estimation someone has of what a Christian is. Fairly or unfairly, when we go out into the world and we profess to be a Christian, what people see of you on any given night is their estimation of what a Christian is, should be,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really up to us to carry the cross and do it well. We are going to be hated of all men for his name's sake. That's what Christ said. It's the name of Jesus or God carried into any conversation is going to change that conversation. But if we can find our way of relating to those folks, you will get through. And yes, the journey may be long. Like we said earlier, those prayers might not be answered right away. Those views might be stuck at 1 or 2. Stick with it. The cause is greater than yourself. The cause is greater than you, and there will be a day where God will reward you. He'll show you your purpose. You'll find your lane, and you will get there. We're in this about 3 years in, and we've seen a lot of days where we woke up and refreshed the page, and there was only 3 views and no likes, and it's still like that from time to time. But I always remind myself those 3 people maybe never heard the gospel before, or maybe they learned something today that they never knew, and that's what it's all.
And I think about that, thinking of Apostle Paul, we talked about a little earlier. Like, I don't know if he ever considered when he wrote a random letter to church at Galatia, he was just like, I'm just gonna write this letter real quick and just tell them you guys need to do this and this, that we would be reading it 2,000 years later and calling it a book, putting it into a tome that is the most sold book of all time. Like, he was just writing a letter. It may not have ever really been a big deal in his lifetime. In his lifetime, he may have went to his grave never knowing that these letters would become what we consider to be the canon of our faith. He was just writing letters. He was just writing letters to churches. We don't even know how many people were at those churches. There could have been 12 people there that he wrote a letter to. And now we quote from it. It's just such an amazing thing that you don't know the legacy that you're also leaving behind. Maybe it doesn't happen when we see it or in our lifetime. So as we wrap up, I would love to know, you're obviously you're a preacher who plays games and does all these other things in the space. What would you say for someone who's looking at that and saying, well, how do you do both of these? It kind of almost seems diametrically opposed. There's a lot of people in the church that I will say my most challenging comments that I've received from people for what we do at Finding God in Video Games came from people from that side. Unfortunately, it's not typically from the people I'm trying to reach. It's from the people I'm trying to introduce them to. I'm like, never mind, don't meet those people. We're gonna keep you over here. So what does that look like for you? You're the blind preacher who plays.
Well, I typically get, first of all, it's a blind preacher. What? How do you even play games in the first place? That's usually the first question I get.
Are you really blind?
Or are you really blind? And then I'll usually get, why a Christian shouldn't play video games or a Christian shouldn't do this. And my response always to that is that's exactly why I'm doing this. This is a left out and kind of forgotten space in the Christian gaming space. We need more. We need more like you and more like millions or thousands of others. We need as many voices for Christ as we can get. But sadly, a lot of times your biggest critics are ones that should be alongside of you in this mission and helping you. And it's so important. But it circles back again to the whole, how do you approach people through video gaming? Well, I'm wearing, which I know you're Star Wars. That's one of the first things I saw. There's so many Christian undertones in Star Wars. So folks like Star Wars, you go in, you start talking about Star Wars. Hey, do you know how, Obi-Wan Kenobi says the Force will be with you always? Well, Jesus Christ said that he would be with us always. There's so many things. You could just go on and on for many days, with that. But when you start pointing those things out, they're like, wow, That's kind of interesting. I never thought about that before. I used to have a series on the channel called Pop Culture in the Bible, where I took on Ninja Turtles or Star Wars or Spider-Man, all these different things, and pointed out the Christian undertones. I had a lot of positive comments on that. Folks never saw that before. There's a way of opening people's eyes at things. So what I try to do is take whatever game I'm playing at the time and relate it to some gospel thing. So I played Halo Infinite recently, related to wearing God's armor. Master Chief would be nowhere without his armor. So there's ways of bringing Christianity in. What Paul, Acts 17th chapter, talked about, to the unknown God. Those in Athens at the time, they were very religious. They were very curious about things. But he said, you see all this pop culture, all these things you got. That unknown God? Let me tell you about that unknown God. And that's what we're still trying to do today. Let me tell you about that unknown God in your life.
And I think that's what's so important about what this particular outreach ministry is for you, is this is a generation filled with curiosity. There's a lot of curiosity, and they're all looking for something real, something tangible. That's why everyone flocks to reality TV, even though it's the least real thing that you'll ever find.
Yeah.
We go to things like our comic books and our comic movies and our video games and such, because we're looking for something that makes sense in a world that often doesn't. And we have a chance in gaming specifically to alter the narrative and make it make sense. And I think that's what's great about what you're doing, is you're taking that curiosity and that desire for something more, and you're showing them where that something more is.
Yeah.
So so let's say that this is someone's first introduction to you. Where do we find what you're creating? What's your handles and your places, and what are the things that we can follow you at?
Oh, sure. First of all, we're on Poetically Christian, 2 words, on YouTube. We are also on Poetically Christian Gamer, all 1 word, on Twitch. And we try to stream Mondays and Fridays around 8 p.m. for there. On our YouTube channel, we put up new videos, Lord willing, Wednesdays through Fridays at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Also on X or Twitter. I never can keep that straight. It's PCD, so PCD, and then the number 4, and then faith ampersand fun, because Poetically Christian wouldn't fit. So I had to come up with something else.
You should try doing this, finding God. Like at first, we were finding God in the world of video games, and that is terrible for algorithms.
Yeah, but we're those 3 places, and of course, I do a daily devotional Monday through Saturdays on Poetically Christian Derrick Stevens. So you can join us there, comment. We'd love to have you. Being a poet myself, I'm author of 3 books called Poetry for Thought. I found that it's easier to find me by searching my name, Derrick Stevens, DerrickStevens, than it is searching the title of my book on Amazon. But I've done that, and being a poet, I try to put a poetic spin on daily devotions every day. So I hope folks enjoy that.
Fantastic. Well, it was such a pleasure getting to sit down with both you and your lovely wife and get to learn a little bit more about this incredible ministry and all the different things that you're doing for the Lord. If you want to follow and find Derrick and Brandy through their journeys and everything they're doing, we'll put all of it on the screen here for you. Just thank you both so much for sharing your passion for Christ and how you use these incredible hobbies and passions of yours to intersect with that faith and reach people that might not have been reached any other way. Any last encouragement before we wrap up?
Thank you guys so much for what you do. We really appreciate it. I look forward to your devotionals every day that you do as well, and the videos that you put up. Being a retro guy, I like the rewind series you guys do. And I would like to thank you for your support through my wife, who's been going through cancer. She's been an inspiration to me, and those prayers mean more than anything. So thank you guys so much for that.
And never lose hope. Always have hope. That's the biggest thing, is always have hope and believe in your faith in God and follow your heart with him.
Faith is a victory.
Yes.
Amen. Thank you both so much. This was a lot of fun. And if you haven't already, please follow them in their journey. You will be blessed by it and you'll be encouraged through it. Thank you for joining us. This was Finding God in Video Games Ministry Spotlight on Poetically Christian.
Thanks, guys. GG. Good game, and God is good.